thank you for becoming. Thank you for attending the Planning Committee meeting for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And we will move on with public comments. I do not have any speaker cards at this time. So we'll move on to approval of the minutes. Have a motion.
Motion. She seconds it.
Yes.
First by Hudson, second by Mitchoff. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. Move on to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion for the consent calendar?
Second.
First by Hudson, second by Abelson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. On to regular agenda items. Item 5.0, which is a consideration of entering into a joint corridor study effort for San Pablo Avenue. Mr. Engelman.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning, and I'm here tonight to broach an idea with you. This is the very first you've ever heard about it, but I was at a meeting a few months back, and I found out that the Alameda County Transportation Commission was going to develop a corridor study for San Pablo, and first I had heard about it, and I said, well, where does it end? And they said, well, it ends at the border of Contra Costa and Alameda. And I said, well, that's not going to work out so well. So how about if we partner? How about if we get WICTAC involved? How about if we get the authority involved and look at the whole corridor? So I have a map here of San Pablo Avenue, just so everybody can remember. The blue line here is San Pablo Avenue, and as you can see, it goes all the way from downtown Oakland to all the way up through Pinole, past Hercules. Once it gets past Highway 4, it really turns into a two-lane scenic highway. The part that Alameda CTC is really interested in looking at is the State Route 123 as it goes to the north through El Cerrito, and they'd probably take it up to north of San Pablo, probably up to about the Hilltop shopping area, which is where the AC Transit service runs to. So we're not talking about going all the way to Hercules, though the study limits would probably go to Hercules. But the idea here is to take another look at this corridor. And you may say, well, it's been studied to death, but it actually has been quite a while, about a decade or more since we've looked at the San Pablo Avenue corridor just by itself. And this would be in response to a couple of things. First of all, we're responding to implementation of the I-80 ICM project and the lights going on I-80 and traffic diversions potentially to San Pablo Avenue. And then second, we'd be responding to the conclusions of a high-capacity transit study that is being conducted in West County, and John Nemeth is here, Executive Director of WICTAC. He's been managing that study with the consultant WSP, Parsons Brinkerhoff. And maybe we could go to the next slide, and I'll show you that out of that high-capacity study, and WICTAC's been learning about this, there are a couple of plans now to look at things like the BART extension, extending BART from Richmond, expanding Capital Corridor service. But the really interesting or promising services are essentially a median or side bus lane, which would essentially be a bus rapid transit service. And this would cross the border. It would go down into Alameda County. It would come up into the El Cerrito BART station, serve the Richmond BART. And cost-wise, it's a fraction of the cost of extending BART. And there's another slide here of another alternative that kind of stays to the west and joins with the Richmond BART extension. So we want to look at these, look at San Pablo Avenue, look at the forecast for San Pablo Avenue, look at the outcomes of the development of priority development areas along San Pablo, and Alameda CTC would be the lead for this study. We don't quite know the cost yet, but the idea is, in concept, that Alameda CTC will pay the lion's share for the study, and then the authority and WICTAC would join in, and as we did for the high-capacity transit study, we would all work together as a team to look at the San Pablo Avenue corridor in more detail and start to refine and configure some of these options if they do, in fact, turn out to be plausible. So tonight, Mr. Chairman and committee members, we're not asking you to sign off on anything, and we're not asking for any money even. We're just asking for your in-concept buy-in should this study pencil out as something that we can afford to participate in. We figure the cost of the study is probably going to be less than $1 million, and perhaps our share would be a couple of $100,000, and we'd put that into the next year's budget, into the 17-18 CMA budget, and contribute to it and participate in it. We have already talked to WICTAC, I believe. WICTAC has heard about this, and following this meeting, the full WICTAC board will be presented with the concept as you've heard it tonight. And if everybody is in agreement, we'll figure out a funding scheme. We'll come back to you with the full scope of work. We'll come back to you with a cooperative agreement and a funding plan. But tonight we're asking if you have interest in this and if you're willing to give in-concept approval to continuing to work with Alameda CTC on this corridor study.
I actually have a number of questions about it. I actually had a few questions. So this is a transit? Is this a transit study, or is this what kind of study?
This is a multimodal study.
Multimodal?
So it's going to look at the traffic. It will look at the cars and the forecast. But the primary focus is on improving the flow of traffic on San Pablo, dealing with the different configurations, but also getting improved transit service on San Pablo in consideration of all the service that already exists and the outcome of this high-capacity study. So it's a multimodal study, I'd call it.
So El Cerrito just did a specific plan quite recently that includes a complete streets plan, and I can't figure out if this is compatible with that, for example. Do you have a comment on that first?
Certainly. I'd be happy to comment on that. That's one of the reasons for doing this study. There have been so many changes along San Pablo Avenue, and each of the jurisdictions have developed various concepts, but they haven't, to my knowledge anyway, they haven't all been put together so that we can look at the corridor as a whole. But certainly this study would incorporate that and take that specific plan and work with it and try to, whatever they configure, they would try to configure it into what you've already decided to do. Now, if there's a new idea, that would have to be looked at by each city along the corridor and reconsidered.
I mean, what I'm wondering about is complete streets is, I think, a pretty up-to-date term, for example, but this doesn't even mention that kind of terminology. I think this doesn't mention bikes, for example. It doesn't. I don't think it mentions pedestrians. So it's hard. I actually thought what this was something like the International Boulevard study and implementation. Reading this, I mean, I was guessing somewhat here, but so this
well,
is,
if we're remiss in that certainly that was not the intent. There is a summary scope of work and it does include bicycling. There is a paragraph on page 5.5 about implementing complete streets, and this is just the summary scope of work. The detailed scope of work is many pages longer than this. The intent is absolutely to look at walking, bicycling, complete streets, high-density development that's planned along the corridor, and actually the patterns of travel from these new housing developments to jobs, and serving them perhaps with improved bus transit.
How is this different than what's already in place with the, say, the specific plan in El Cerrito, which talks about complete streets? How is this different, or an improvement, or whatever?
Well, it's really taking the work you've done and joining it with the work that's been done to the north and the south by the adjacent jurisdictions. And you may be ahead of the game with a more finely developed specific plan, but the idea is to put all those plans from the various cities together and look at them at the corridor level.
Because I guess I can't quite tell that from this. The next thing I had is the question, was it talks about on page 5-3, actually, State Route 123, and it talks about, it says from MacArthur Boulevard in Emeryville to Cutting Boulevard in Richmond. And actually, I thought it ended in El Cerrito, but I could be wrong on that. I thought it ended at the freeway. Am I right? Pardon?
123 ends at Cutting. at
Yeah,
San
but I
Pablo.
thought that's El Cerrito. The part that goes to the
in
freeway?
Richmond.
El Cerrito.
Yeah, the city.
Oh, okay,
Close.
but when I look at the map, it doesn't show that, at least, I don't know what that pink line is supposed to represent. It shows McDonald's, so I'm kind of confused.
Can we go back to the first map? So this is the map. This map actually shows just in the blue, just San Pablo Avenue, 123, and at some point up there to the north, Cutting Boulevard, it is no longer a state route. I think that's the intent of that sentence. The corridor study would look at that blue line. The next map, if we could go to the next map, is actually a map that we pulled from the high capacity transit study that's underway in West County, and this is simply a proposed bus rapid transit alignment that PB is costing out and examining in greater detail. So this is not the San Pablo Avenue corridor study. This is the West County high capacity transit study that's currently underway. And it's just one of many alternatives that are being examined.
Oh, okay, it's just I have confusion about what's going on here as a result of all of these different things, and there often is a lot of confusion, especially by stuff that's, I believe, not, I don't even know if that's been vetted, but and part of that has to do with the transit paths and what one is trying to do, and so I'm a little it's confusing to me because it doesn't necessarily represent what I understand to be important data, like, for example, that there's more volume on San Pablo Avenue than on McDonald. And therefore, we would want to, if we were having a high-capacity transit system, we would want to put it on San Pablo where the riders are, rather than on another street where they there aren't as many riders. So that's, guess what, I'm just presenting that this doesn't look completely, it's confusing.
So Commissioner Abelson, one of the good things about this is that Martin and his team and John and others are starting to take a look at these routes from a regional perspective, not just from a county or a city perspective. And so people that use these long corridors generally don't realize what cities they're in. What they mostly complain about is a lack of coordination between the service. And so I think the good news today is that we brought this forward because when originally presented, it was just to study Alameda. And so you're talking a major corridor that has a lot of opportunity for improvement, that the scope addresses your complete streets issue, because you've done a lot of work on that, and they know that. It studies making sure that pedestrians can cross the street, and bicycles, if they don't belong on San Pablo, they'll study an alternative signing method to get them off of San Pablo, but make sure they run parallel to that corridor to wherever they want to go. But these things won't get done unless somebody takes a look at that. And as you know, technology is starting to change.
We actually just decided at least in our city, they should be on San Pablo
Okay,
Avenue. But we already kind of, but I'm actually talking about the route right now. And what historically has been described as the ridership levels. So that is where the people are using this. There are more, the volume of people is, I've been told repeatedly, on San Pablo Avenue. It is on San Pablo Avenue, and it is, but this is kind of, so I'm just a little confused about.
This is San Pablo. This is the study of San
No,
Pablo.
McDonald is what I'm talking about.
I haven't heard any mention of McDonald.
Well, it shows in the map, like, see the purple, see where it says potential express bus
Yeah,
rapid transit center? Okay, then it goes to the left.
right.
That's McDonald.
Okay, but there's more of it going on San Pablo. That's what they're going to do. They want to scope this out to study it.
I'm just pointing out that it's, we keep studying, I suppose, is my concern. And then the money, why would the money come from WICTAC rather than, it wouldn't, I guess my question is, there are a number of places it could come from, and I'm just wondering why in this particular case it would be WICTAC, and would the cities be expected to pay, is a question I have. Maybe we can just start there.
So in order to get the study expanded from just Alameda County to include Contra Costa, first question that Alameda CTC staff asked me was, well, if you want us to study in your county, you better step up to the plate and put a little money on the table. So we won't get it for free. We have to put some money on the table, and I've offered from the authority to come to the board here and talk about the possibility of a couple of $100,000, potentially less than $1 million study, so that they would have the funding to cover our part of the corridor. Since it is going to be, the study will be overseen essentially by the Western Planning Committee of Alameda CTC and WICTAC, very similar to the high-capacity transit corridor. We would ask WICTAC if they're interested, and that your WICTAC board has not heard about this yet, but we would like to go to WICTAC and ask them if they'd be willing to participate in the study, and if they'd be willing to use some of their funds for that. The cities wouldn't have to individually pay. I think it would come out of some other funding source, perhaps sub-regional needs funds. There's Measure J programs out there that can fund these kind of things. Sub-regional needs, I think, there's $250,000 a year that goes into that. And so it's all up in the air, under discussion, and looking for in-concept buy-in. Perhaps, John, if you'd like to talk about the schedule for talking to WICTAC board about this, and then how delicately you will ask for the funding.
Sure. Thank you, Martin. And maybe before I get into that, I just wanted to thank Martin and Randy and the staff for keeping West County in mind when they found out about this study. And having looked at the scope and thought about it, we think that it makes, at least at a staff level, sense for us to participate in this. And I just want to reassure Director Abelson, and maybe we should have chatted about this a little bit before the meeting. But
Yes.
But there's a lot of competing needs in this corridor. There's vehicular needs. There's issues related to the I-80 ICM. There's interest in improving complete streets and bicycle pedestrian use in the corridor. There's also ideas for greatly improving bus transit, including BRT and souping up the rapid bus maybe. So when you put all that together, there's a lot of competing needs in this corridor. And then you've got cities with their own specific plans, and there's just a lot going on. And so having an entity that's going to look at the whole corridor, including the whole AC transit service area, and think about all the planning issues within the corridor, within that service area, I think could be beneficial. So there is this question about our potential financial participation. And before we went to the WICTAC board, we wanted to see if there was even interest from the authority in having West County participate, and whether the authority was interested in putting up possibly some funds. Because if the answer was no, then there wasn't really a whole lot of point in bringing this to the WICTAC board. So we've only talked about it at a staff level. We have talked with some of our TAC members, because the ACTC folks are talking about having a very open TAC where our cities that are part of this corridor would be represented on the TAC and could help choose a consultant, et cetera. So once we find out, I think, what the planning committee thinks and what the full authority thinks, especially as it relates to participation financially and what ACTC is going to want, and what this board is willing to contribute, and then what amount we might have to contribute and have our own skin in the game as West County. Because obviously the smaller that is, the easier it is. The bigger that number it is, the more wary our board may be. But first step is just to see if the authority is on board with our participation. But as a staff, we're interested and
When would
appreciative.
it go to WICTAC? Before?
It would go after the authority meeting.
I forgot. No. Jen and I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, and the more I go back to it, this is an easy answer. In concept, yes. You don't know exactly what the dollars are yet, but you're going to be invited to participate. The key to it is you didn't have to, this isn't an ACTC WICTAC, you want to do it. Exactly what you just said. We're committing something to this. We're not sure exactly what it is. But I have to tell you, sitting on a different board with Karen, the regional boards are looking at these corridors. And if we haven't done something in 10 years that should have been updated since AB 32, you're going to just fall down the list. You got to find ways to fight your way up the list, not sit there and quibble over pennies. I mean, well, maybe not pennies, but the reality here is this was a good catch by staff. I mean, we should be embracing. If you want to come out and find something on the Iron Horse Trail, go up and down there a couple of times, Martin. I mean, I'll get you a water bottle or something. I mean, you need to find a way to move you up the priority list, and this is it for you guys, because I can tell you, you're on the list, but it's not going to go anywhere unless you are doing all of your early cradola little things that you got to do for when somebody says, we got some money, here it is. If you're in the environmental stage, or if you're shovel ready or something like that. And that's what you guys should be fighting for. And after saying that, Jen, I'm going to sit back. If you guys say no, I'll agree with you.
I just actually think that we should be discussing it rather than it
You guys should
being,
be discussing
that's exactly what I'm saying, is that we haven't discussed it at all.
Okay. Let me get back in on that time. I haven't finished it yet. But one of the things that I think you should discuss when you're discussing it, because I think this is important to a lot of people that work in the city. I see that corridor kind of end at at the bridge. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they threw in there, so how do you get to the Trans Bay Terminal if you had some kind of transit running there, because the way BART's going, it probably will get you there 20 minutes faster.
Talk to Jim Sperry, and that's fine.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is just in concept, so do you want to move, that they move forward
Well,
in
I'm
concept?
just wondering if it wouldn't be a good idea to have it go to WIC
Well, he said,
first.
your staff person is saying that they wanted a little bit of knowing whether this board would even be willing to consider it.
I know, but I think it's sort of backwards.
Let's do it. No, let's do it.
That
Yeah,
it
you're
should
right.
be
Send it to
discussed
WIC.
by WICTAC and find out what the interest is and in what way, on top of the other $1 million study that we are doing currently and how it interfaces with that study, for example. And
And I'll just say, Commissioner Abelson, that I think, staff were fine either way. It gets to be a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. Do we, we get the authority's concurrence and then bring that to the WICTAC board, or talk to the WICTAC board and then come to the authority? And it doesn't matter to me as staff. Will do whatever makes sense to this body.
and the jurisdictions, like the one that I represent, for example, we just also did another one called a specific plan that looked at this same, that looked at a big chunk of the area and spent a bunch of money doing that. So this actually would be the third study in a row that would be done in the same area in my city. So we are, so the question is, what
What would you like to move, Janet? I'll second it.
I would like to move that we refer it to WICTAC for
Second.
their
Blessing.
consideration and then bring it back here as needed. Does that make sense?
Sure, I have a motion on the table to deny it at this level.
Well, why don't we just table it till our next meeting? That's what we need to do.
Well, I think when it goes to the WICTAC board, the question will come up,
How much
is
it
the
gonna cost?
authority interested, and are they willing in concept to participate? And that's the only question we're asking you tonight is, are you interested in the study, and are you willing in concept to participate if all the other parties come to the table? That's the
think
only question we're asking you.
I think if WICTAC is the key agency for this, then the question for CCTA is, are they willing to put up money? I believe.
The answer was yes.
And 200 out of what's described as less than $1 million, I don't know what number that is, let's call it 800,000, means there's 600,000 to find, right?
No, the 600 would be paid
Oh,
by
that's the whole
Alameda CTC, and we would pay the 200.
You would pay the 200?
Right, and then we're looking
Okay,
to
I didn't actually
WICTAC
catch
to-
that. Was
for a
what
crumb.
it was. I was thinking to the one that we're doing already,
No.
where we're an equal player in the funding. So
The Alameda CTC will fund the lion's share of this study. That's our understanding, and we are we're adding to that
Was
number so that they will
in terms
extend
of-
it into our area.
in terms of mileage, the lion's share is in our county. And they're still willing to pay for most of it?
That's correct.
Okay. I still like what I just said, which is that WICTAC needs to be talking, I think we should allow the sub-regional committee to discuss it. Usually that is the way it's done. The sub-regional
I don't have a problem
committee.
with it, but we just need to move on.
I already made,
Yeah,
I made a motion, seconded. I'm not,
We have one final comment.
And as the new guy, I'm really reluctant to be the one that says, I really support the concept. And I support it respectfully, even for El Cerrito, because you could do the best design in the whole world. And if either side of your city mucks it up without this study, you will have wasted all your time and energy. So we're not asking for money. We're not asking for anything. They're just asking us if we could just, say, yeah, if it works out, let's find out if it works out. I can see no downside to making this harder than it is. And so I don't know what to do to be in.
We usually defer to the RTBC.
If they don't
Okay.
bless it, we back on.
And we were only asked that if they had, we asked, it was asked in the right order.
That's right.
Yes, it was asked, but so we have to formalize it, I guess, for everybody to really be comfortable? Is that the point?
Respect.
Okay, all right, well, I'm old enough to be respectful.
Okay. So we're going to have this go to WICTAC first, and then we'll come back to our agenda after they have made their decision? So what exactly is your motion, Ms. Ailes?
You want me to make it again?
Refer to WICTEC.
Refer to WICTAC.
Okay.
Motion Abelson, second Hudson.
Yep.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries unanimously. 6.0, approval proposed 2017 Congestion Management Program, update work plan. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Romick and members. As you longtime committee members know, every 2 years we are required by state legislation to update the Congestion Management Program as a congestion management agency in the state of California. The 2017 update of the CMP will be our 13th CMP and will be basically prepared entirely in-house by staff. The CMP has 5 required components. The first is that we establish level of service standards on a countywide roadway network that includes all the state highways as well as the principal arterials that were nominated by local jurisdictions. It must include the establishment of performance measures to evaluate our current and future multimodal performance of the transportation system for movement of people and goods. It must include a 7-year capital improvement program that identifies projects that seek to maintain or improve this multimodal system. It must contain a program to analyze the impacts of local land use decisions on the regional network. And it must have a travel demand element that promotes transportation alternatives to the single occupant vehicle. Just a little bit of background on the CMP for our new member tonight. It was established statewide in 1991. And at that time, the state legislature used CCTA's recently established growth management program as the model for the CMP legislation. So for that reason, many of the requirements of the CMP are covered in our growth management program. So we defer to the growth management program for those requirements. But we do use the CMP to document our current activities in the 2-year cycle, our latest policies and major milestones, and we also use it as to update the 7-year capital improvement program and to monitor the arterial and freeway congestion that we do every 2 years. Since that is a major component, we do devote most of the resources to the monitoring, where we check level of service at 65 intersections around the county. That allows us to track changes in the performance over time, and we've taken on adding bicycle and pedestrian counts at all those intersections. We just do that as part of the monitoring, and we've been doing that since 2011. So we're now able to track non-motorized changes in the network. A change in the environment that's happened recently is the passage of Senate Bill 743, which removes level of service and vehicle delay as a finding of significance in CEQA documents and replaces it with vehicle miles traveled. And currently in the CMP, level of service is the metric required for the monitoring. We will continue to do that, but we imagine state legislation will change that over time. But we will document the activities we are doing here to address SB 743, including the update of the action plans. MTC's CMP guidance for the 2017 cycle is yet to be released, but when that happens, we'll address any new items in the guidance during the development of the CMP. As far as schedule, we plan to monitor the network in March and April. We plan to open the project database for editing in April and May so that project sponsors may update their projects or mark them as completed. And then we will issue a draft in July. Full adoption is scheduled for this December, and at that time, both the authority and MTC will consider adoption of the CMP. So staff's recommendation tonight is to approve the approach, scope, and schedule for the 2017 CMP update. Thank you.
So-
Well, you get to ask questions, Luana. We just.
Are there any questions at this time?
No.
Okay.
Oh, I do. Just two comments, Matt. One, we went through this exercise with the Sustainable Community Strategy to put everything on 8 years. Did we miss this one, or is it worth making some waves to say, hey, why don't we put it to an 8-year CIP instead of a 7?
Oh, the CIP?
Yeah.
I mean, we'd have to. That was the general idea.
Yeah. That was the general idea to begin with, and what I'm asking is if it's not worth it, it's not worth it. But I mean, how did this one? Nah, never mind. The second one is you have some mention in here about the PCAs and the PDAs, and we seem to be getting into a new one now, the PPAs, and I'm not sure where it is in line, if it deserves anything at all, but maybe a footnote that we're looking into the PPAs, and I know it'll be under discussion probably for the next, Karen, couple months, you think, and converting industrial land.
Well, yes, but PPAs are not going to be part of Plan Bay Area until the next go-around, 2 years down the road. As long as I think our staff, I'm assuming our staff is very familiar with that.
Okay, I had a first by Mitchoff, second by Abelson. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. 7.0, review of applications submitted through the Coordinated Call Project. Mr. Beck.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We didn't get a chance to bring this list of projects and the coordinated call for projects directly to you because the deadline in December was after your meeting. It did go to the authority, but we thought we'd bring it back to you and give you an overview of the projects that have been submitted to the various funding programs that are covered in the call for projects. The second page of your packet, 7.7-2, has a table that has the various programs that are being part of the call for projects. A competitive OBAG program, local streets and roads preservation, that's the LSRP. Safe routes to school, that's SRTS. FAS is federal aid secondary. It's funding that goes directly to the county for rural roads. And then the two Measure J programs, TLC and PVTF. The second column is the amount of money available through those programs. Then the next two are the request and the amounts requested and the oversubscription. Now it's somewhat, it looks more dire than in the table than it actually is. Some of the sponsors ask for funding through different funding pots. They've asked for $1 million from competitive OBAG. They asked for $1 million from TLC. Asked for $1 million from PVTF. They only need $1 million, but they're asking it from whatever program they can get it from. So that's why it might look like it's there's more being asked than actually is being asked. At the bottom of the page, it shows the programs, how they're allocated, funding will be allocated, who's going to be reviewing the projects. The competitive OBAG is going to be reviewed by a group of staff people. It's the OBAG working group. They met this afternoon to begin that process. Local streets and roads and safer. There was a mistake on the here. Local streets and roads is going to be reviewed by the authority staff, but only for eligibility and accuracy. The money is allocated by formula, as you discussed and approved earlier, to the 20 jurisdictions in the county. The Safe Routes to School is allocated by formula to the RTPC, so they will be reviewing those non-authority staff. The FAS, that goes directly to the county. They've applied for a project to do pavement work on Kirker Pass. And that, again, that'll just be reviewed for eligibility and accuracy of the application. The TLC also, like the Safe Route to School, will go by formula to the RTPCs, and they'll recommend a list of projects. And the PBTF is being reviewed by the Countywide Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And we've got a schedule here, and we've got a table, attachment A, that has all the projects that are being asked or asking for money, and who their sponsor is, and which the amounts of funding that they're asking for. And that's the majority of the application. So this will come back to you in June for approval after we get all of the recommendations from the various groups and try to put them into a funding program that works best, and so that we can fund as many projects as we can, that we can send as few projects and sponsors through the local assistance process as we can, and try to come up with something that makes as many people happy and serves the people of Contra Costa well. So if you have any question, I'll try to answer them.
Questions? Motion?
It's
Okay.
information, number 7, right?
Yes, we're accepting.
Information, it says.
And we're accepting the report, though.
I'm just accepting of the report.
Yep.
I'll move that then.
Okay. First by Abelson, second by Hudson. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain? No. Motion carries unanimously. Item number 8, new quarterly project status reports and program monitoring report for Measure J programs 12. Mr. Beck.
Yes, this is something that we bring back to you periodically. This time we have something new. We have the quarterly project status reports. We have prepared similar reports for other projects that are funded with Measure J funds, and they've gone to the APC. This is the first time we've brought some to this committee that provides details describing where the project is, what it's proposed to do, the status of the project, any issues that it's facing, and the funding that's been allocated to it. We've had a lot of support from our program management consultants in preparing those. And we've also included an updated monitoring report that gives the overview, the big picture of the two programs. On the second page of the board letter, 8-2, it has some of the key findings. Except for one project, all of the funding's been allocated. That project is asking, through the coordinated call for projects, additional money to actually bring it to construction. Sponsors have invoiced about 61% of the money that's been appropriated. Last time around was about 45%. Since the last report in last July, about 8 of the projects have been completed, and some of the projects have met their original schedule, but a number of them have not for various reasons. The reasons are different depending on which project it is. Some ran into staff changes or cost changes or additional obstacles that they ran into and had to overcome before they could begin their projects. So if you have any questions about this, I'm glad to try to answer them.
Questions?
I just have a comment as the newbie on the board. I really appreciate the translations. So thank you very much for the.
They were a joke. They're all
Yeah.
Motion?
Motions.
Okay, I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
We have accepted the reports.
I move that we accept the reports.
And there is a recommendation that they be posted. Are we okay with that as well? Yep.
Okay. First by Abelson, second by Haskew. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, motion carries unanimously. 9.0, other business. I don't see any. 10.0 is news clippings and correspondence. Read at your pleasure. And option number 11 is adjourn to the next meeting. Oh, excuse me.
You guys never give me a chance to speak here,
Yeah,
but
well,
I
it says
thought I'd add a couple of
then
points.
you ought to just put here on the agenda item.
Commissioners. So last month, January 19th, the second to last day of the administration were at USDOT, where all of the appointees had to resign on the 20th. We were notified that we were our application to be a federally designated test facility by the USDOT was approved. We were one of the 10 test sites in the United States, and the other one in California is Sandag. They're going to use State Route 125, which is a toll road, and then Interstate 15, which is a managed lane, has a sliding barrier. And they called us beforehand, and we gave them a letter of support. We didn't ask for a letter of support from them, but we added them to our application. So we're one of the 10 test facilities in the United States. And I wanted to let you know on March 30th of this year, at the Roundhouse in San Ramon at Bishop Branch, we're going to host our 3rd annual Redefining Mobility Summit. So put that on your calendar if you're interested in the latest and greatest on autonomous connected vehicle technology. One of the sessions is going to be on regulations. I'll moderate that. But the interesting one, I think, for all of you is we're going to try to bring in developers from around the country that are trying to figure out how to build cities that have less parking and more innovation in them. And so that should be a really good panel. So mark your calendars on the 30th, and then we're going to have Media Day on the 8th if it doesn't rain. One of the shuttles now are out at Bishop Branch, and it's mapping its path. And so the idea is on the 8th to have a Media Day.
Anything else?
That's
Do you have
it.
time?
Thank you. Media, not yet. It's going to be early in the morning, though. 5:30. No, not 5:30. They'll start at 5:30. Oh, on the 30th, I think, I believe it's 8:30 check-in, 9 o'clock start, but I'll double check that.
And we'll get a specific notice.
I'm just giving you advance warning, so if you can hold that date.
We'll send out something later this week or next week.
Next week, yes.
It's in San Ramon, so you can come.
Well, it's the 5th Thursday, and that's always good when it's the 5th day of the week.
Supervisor, you've been a speaker at I think most of the other last two, so it's always worked to your schedule. So.
And thank you for doing that. Welcome.
And now we will move for adjournment till our March 1st meeting. Thank you all for coming today.